So at Res Artis, we're focused on creating a future for the global arts residency sector that works towards creating accessible residency opportunities. We talked about what access means for different people and in different places during our recent Res Artis Conference, Mind the Gap Designing Residencies for Everyone, which was hosted in September in London by Acme with University College London. Now, following on from the conference, we're facilitating regional and thematic meetings to find out how best to support our members in improving their programs. And today's discussion will be the beginning of many conversations to consider how we can implement best practice to create accessible residencies. I'm Josephine Mead, and I'm the Communication and Program Coordinator at Res Artis, and I'm calling from Dja Dja Wurrung country today in Australia, and I'm joined by Catto of ActionSpace in the UK, Mia Brebnell and Charlotte Seebeck. Mia will shortly join us, from Res Artis member MASSIA from Estonia, and Paula Orrell from Contemporary Visual Arts Network. And today's discussion will be informal. And to begin, I'd just love to hear about each of your respective experiences in relation to access, whether personal or through your work. And perhaps, Cheryl, you'd like to begin.
Okay. Please jump in and ask questions anytime you want. First of all, thank you very much to you and Acme for inviting me to be part of the Res Artis Conference. It was actually really eye-opening for me. I work with ActionSpace supports learning disabled artists, and we support artists right from the beginning of discovering their talent and then developing their practices. We are guided by the artists as to how they want to develop their practice. So whether that's a personal practice for, just helping them cope with life, or whether it's a professional practice, but very much placing the artist within the visual arts sector, as opposed to sort of working off somewhere else. We've been working with a lot of our artists for a very long time, and a lot of them are now at the point where they're very much part of the sector. They're exhibiting, they're getting commissions, and residencies has become a really important thing. Residencies do two things for their artists. It's, as with everyone else, it's time to experiment without the demands of having to create something at the end and learn new things. But also, really importantly, it's about collaboration. It's an opportunity to work alongside other artists, to work in different places and get different experiences than just being at ActionSpace. And that is becoming, as I say, more and more and more important. Obviously, there needs to be flexibility to make it possible for our artists. We've had a few residencies. I am longing to do an international residency, and that's something that we would have to build up to. But ActionSpace exists as an organization to support the artists to do that. I think with the residencies we've had in the past, some have been good, some have not worked so well. Where they've worked well is that there's a real, it's the right residency for the artist. So it's not an organization that says, I want to be diverse or inclusive and I'm going to have a learning disabled artist. It's an organization that their approach, whatever they're interested in, chimes with the artist. So recently we had a really successful artist for one of our artists, Thompson Hall, at Autograph Gallery in London. Autograph is run by the Association of Black Photographers. A lot of their work is around inclusion, diversity, a lot of public issues. Thompson's work also is in that area. So the residency, first of all, worked because Thompson visits the gallery all the time. He sees their exhibitions as an inspiration for his work. We developed a relationship with them, and then it came to the natural point where it made sense for Thompson to do the residency there. We then sat down with them. We talked about what Thompson would need to be able to do that. Obviously, money is a big thing, because our artists need support. They need, Thompson is actually quite able. But he does need support to structure the residency, and he needs a touch in from one of his artist facilitators, ActionSpace artist facilitator, to help him process and sort of decide what he's doing next. We worked really, really well with them. We had regular touch-ins. We sort of once a week would sit down with Thompson and the team there and say what's going right, what's going wrong. Lots of flexibility. It's good to have a sort of a structure or a schedule for the residency, but it's also good to be able to throw that up in the air if it's not working, or if some other opportunity comes up, and go off in another direction. Lots and lots of communication. That's really an honest communication. Being able to say this worked, this didn't work. So that residency worked extremely well. We've had another one, and I won't sort of go into details, that didn't work as well, simply because it was trying to fit our artist into a box. So they had a residency program. We were invited to be part of it. We did have discussions, but it wasn't able to be flexible. And I'm saying it wasn't able to be flexible because I think there was a will there, but I think because of the structure of that particular residency, it wasn't able to be flexible, and it didn't work. So I think that, again, with the honesty, when you sit down and you say, this is what the offer, I think on both sides we have to say, is this feasible? Sometimes the answer is no. If the answer is no, then we use that as a sort of a leaping off point to be able to discuss. And it might be that sometime in the future, we're able to design a residency that is correct. And I think when I did my talk at Res Artis Conference, the main thing I wanted to say to everyone is fight the fear. I think everyone has a fear that they'll do the wrong thing, they'll cause offense. That often gets in the way of our artists being offered opportunities. But, you know, if we have honest conversations, if we have a sort of a co-designing approach, everybody makes mistakes. We make mistakes on a daily basis. If we make a mistake, we apologize to the artist, we apologize to anyone, and we all learn from that and move forward. So as I said before, I think residencies are really, really important, and I'm really keen for our artists to be able to do more.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's we just received we've just been compiling a report on all the feedback we received from the conference, and there was a lot of really positive feedback about your workshop in particular. And in the comment section, quite a few people actually said, I loved how Cheryl told us to fight the fear, and that they would then working towards implementing more accessible programs in their own residencies. So the workshop really had quite an effect. So thank you.
I'm really glad to hear that. Really, really glad.
Oh, I think sometimes that feedback doesn't actually make it to the speakers, so it's important to pass it on. But it was a real, highlight of the program. And I also love how you talk about ActionSpace supporting the artists with both their professional practice, but also their personal practice, because I think so often, you know, access comes down to actually the personal needs, you know, seeing if an artist needs help going to get their groceries when they're on residency, if they're in a new location, or, you know, those little things. And it really does extend so much outside of making artwork. But when that support is there, that's when, you know, the important artwork can be made. So
And it's worth, I think it's worth saying also, we often find that all of these things are just best practice. I mean, any artist in a residency might need help getting groceries.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I ask Cheryl about ActionSpace? Is it like a workspace for art, like a studio space where artists come to work?
Yeah, we're a supported studio. We've got 3 studios in London, in South Central and now Northwest London. And we run a supported studio program where the artists come in 1, 2, 3 times a week. We have a team of specialist artist facilitators who work with each artist on a one-to-one basis within a group studio setting. A lot of the times that relationship will build over a number of years, and it's really about focusing on each artist and sort of being guided by them. We work with artists right across the spectrum of learning disability. We have a number of artists who have minimal verbal skills, or some who are actually nonverbal. So that relationship is really important. And then the supporting of the development of the practice is through offering sort of informed options. So if you're working with someone who is nonverbal and who has complex learning disability, it's really a lot of observation, offering lots of options, and then picking up on the options that they pick up on, and then sort of seeing where that goes. We work with about
Yeah.
60 to 70 artists on a weekly basis, and they're all fantastic.
Cool.
Paula, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and MASSIA?
Oh, can I just ask another question, Cheryl, because this relates to access, and I suppose sometimes people don't understand that the cost of the kind of residency when they're supporting artists with multiple disabilities. So is that something that you come across, people sort of thinking it's going to cost them a lot more than it would, you know, an able-bodied artist, let's say?
I'm going to be really honest, and it is.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of cases, particularly with our artists, as I said before, the relationship between the artist facilitator and the artist is really important. That relationship gives the artist a sense of security, a sense of acceptance. So if we're doing something with our artist, the artist facilitator has to be involved. And just because it makes them, you know, they're able to design the residency and make them feel comfortable, but then also they're able to then take whatever comes out of the residency and make it go forward. So there is a cost of support. Our facilitators are all freelance. So if we're doing anything, they have to be paid. So it will cost more. But again, I think the other thing I said in my talk is you need to think, what are your priorities? I mean, you know, do you want to do this? We're happy to work with you. It will cost more, but what you'll get out of it as a residency center, I mean, I think Andrew, who did the workshop with me, is just amazing. I think the reason my workshop was so good is because I brought Andrew with me, and he ran the workshop, and it brought so much, I felt, to the conference, but it does cost more. There's no way of getting around that.
And assuming, is also some of that support, is that funded by the government as well, or do you make, or is it literally additional artist support? Is there? Yeah,
it's additional, but we tend to write it into our funding bids. A lot of funders you can ask for support separately. I mean, in terms of personal support, that usually comes from the artists themselves. If they're in supported living, in the past, we've been able to take their support worker, their personal support worker, with us to residencies. We did one recently in Belgium with Nena Kaulu, and her support worker came with her to provide that 24 support. But in terms of the artistic support, which comes from us, as I said, our facilitators are all freelance, so we do have to charge for it, so that gets costed in. But you know, as I said, we work with you on it. You get value for money with us because you pay for X hours, and because the facilitators are so dedicated, you tend to get Y hours. But yeah, but it's important to cost that in, and I think we have to be honest in the beginning. And again, when I came back to the box of a residency, if that box isn't flexible to either find or be able to leverage extra funding for that support, then that's not going to work. And as I said, then we talk and we maybe do something later.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah.
Charlotte, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Yes, I can, like in my personal work, I can really relate to what was said. But first about MASSIA, I'm relatively new, like I was there for the first time in spring and got involved with the self-organization. And I'm also here in Berlin still in a postgrad program at the University of Art. So I'm in between, like in a residency space and in arts education, and seeing a lot about access issues. And like the main thing about MASSIA, like, is or the special thing is that there is no selection process. Like, everyone can go there. There's no application procedure or anything, and everyone contributes with a little price per night, and then also with maintenance work there. Like, yeah, so there is like this challenge to give people free space to come and work there, but also to very quickly pick up on what is needed, because it's a old schoolhouse that needs a lot of care and a lot of renovation work, and there's no stable public funding for it, and it's not wheelchair accessible yet. Like, there's a lot of repairs and things that need to be done. So yeah, accessibility is more on this, it's open for all. And then people have to learn to be there to communicate their access needs and their understand. Like, for many people, it's also a new term they've never heard of, because people live and work there and together in the same building. And like, coming from or still being in art school, I see that the University of Arts here is still a predominantly white and able-bodied space. And I was working in different groups for access that regard like social economic background, or for people with displaced background, to learn how aesthetics work, to like enter a university, how art works, like the languages of art. And then I started thinking about creating access, working with multimedia and art, of course. And I started working with a blind colleague and friend now, and together we are right at the moment organizing a residency, or we are going on a residency with a small intimate group to Spain with this Culture Moves grant by Goethe Institute. And we applied for extra money for one friend to just come to assist Celia, because we're going to a like a farmhouse that is, so far that I know, like only able-bodied artists have been to. So it's like this like adventure for all of us. And there we, like, for me, the what I want to explore there is like how to hold space for neurodivergent, neuroqueer people, because that's where I'm like positioning, where I feel at home. What can I?
And in terms of holding space for neurodivergent people or neuroqueer people, what are some, if our members are wanting to do that, what would you suggest as some basic first steps or first things to think about?
Like, ask about desires and needs, what people wish from the space and from the group, and how we can support each other to fulfill that, whatever makes people feel safer and more comfortable. And then in places where also other residents, like not only your group is staying, but also new people, like yeah, somehow have a understanding with the group, how you connect with the other people. Maybe you like we want to prepare like sharing formats where we invite the others for little workshops or experiments, or a blind dinner. Yeah, like
it's
things
interesting. So many of our members will often talk about how shared dinners are the most important parts of their programs. There's something important that happens around dinner tables, I think. And
Yeah.
Cheryl and Paula, would you have any suggestions that you'd like to add on top of what Charlotte has said in terms of making space for sort of figuring out what people's needs are when they start a residency?
I was just looking at your website, Charlotte. Oh, sorry, Cheryl. And one of the things that strikes me is that when it feels like it's very artist-led, which I'm sure it is. It's very much about the practice and artists coming together and working together. And I think that's probably it's probably one of the most difficult things to do within an artist, isn't it? Within that sort of collective practice, to create, a physical space and a building that, everyone can occupy it, because of, the means, the cost of it, the approach. But not the approach. Your approach, I think, is the best, is the best lens, isn't it? Even if, it's not accessible physically, there are different ways to kind of access and develop kind of, those relationships in a different way. And find different routes, to find different conversations, really, which is I think more an artist-led practice, and in response to kind of work and ideas and experiences, really. Yeah.
I actually had a question for Charlotte, because obviously residencies sit within a residency space and an artist space, but they also then sit within a wider community. And I had a question about how the residency sits within the wider community. And I noticed from the conference, you have residencies all over the world, particularly in a community that might not be as open or open-minded or liberal towards the artist. Have you had any experiences like that, or how has that worked?
You mean the local community in Estonia?
Or just your experience of having residencies. I was thinking particularly with a neurodivergent and neuro queer outlook, being in a country maybe which was homophobic.
Yeah, we have had incidences of more towards people who were staying there longer, who were like more entangled with the closer city and lives. Yeah, it's a big question. Because we want to organize, we were thinking about organizing a bigger queer residency meeting there. And yeah, that we would have to organize like maybe shuttling or group traveling to this small village. But also that exactly we want to bring the ideas, the exchange about neurodivergency and queerness into rural spaces, and yeah, exchange, invite, I don't know if it's just youth, like people from Estonia, especially to share the space. Yeah.
Definitely been an issue for some of our members in certain areas who run really queer-friendly programs, but don't live in locations that are queer-friendly. And, you know, we've had stories of artists, particularly who rely on a sense of networking for their practice, but having to undertake that networking in the community with a level of danger, and other artists who have had to you know, haven't been able to publicize the work that they're making in that actual context until they get home. So it's definitely a really major issue within the global arts residency sector, obviously specific to location, but it's good to see more queer-led or queer-focused programming coming through, which is important because I think, you know, representation is the best vehicle for challenging these sorts of things. But yeah, it's definitely an issue. And Paula, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not coming at this from a residency perspective, so I'm coming from it in relation to the question, I suppose, you're considering in how to approach access in relation to Res Arts and what what you can share with your community. The one thing that being dyslexic means that you have to spend more time like processing and approaching things. You have to think, it takes a lot longer to kind of digest and engage and respond as well. And I think now where we're in this very, very fast moving space of not that it has never been a fast space, the kind of visual arts, because I've worked in some really high pressured and and especially as a curator, you are very much kind of moving at a a super speed pace. I think in the sector, it's about deeper learning and a deeper understanding of access needs that's needed. And the approach needs to be really, really, really considered instead of it being a kind of like, let's say, a statement or a rhetoric. It needs to be actually really embedded in the conversation, and not just the policy, but actually in the fabric of a building. And not just to say, on your emails, it's about you taking time, don't respond quickly, it's about that individual taking time. It's actually finding a process how you approach your conversation through particularly writing form as well. And I think that's a really difficult issue for our sector, given the fact that a lot of our work is about the written form. It's about interpretation, it's about language, it's about visual kind of critical kind of thinking. And if you have a learning disability, that doesn't mean that you can't do that. It's just that in fact, actually, people who have learning disabilities, including majority of dyslexic people, are incredibly visual. Visual language is really strong, because often I think in images. I have images that come to my mind versus kind of language. So my brain looks at things in a in a different way. And I'll piece things together in a different way that might be different from the norm, the normal, what is known as the normal. So I think it's about for any advice or any kind of opportunity, it's about really thinking deeper about, you know, anti-ableist approaches. And I'd also, you know, refer that to also, you know, anti-racist approach as well. We need a greater, deeper understanding of these two areas of our culture and society that would, you know, flood into the natural kind of experience of that individual. And you know, often you walk into gallery spaces or environments and they feel hostile. You know, they already feel the most uncomfortable space to be in. And I think the most comfortable space I've ever been in is where I've walked into a charity that supports artists with disabilities, and there they are on the front of house. Yeah, it's the most comfortable space I've ever experienced, is just going, oh my God, that's amazing. That's absolutely incredible. You know, I'm so relaxed now. Let's do this. So it really is about finding ways that we can bring people who aren't normal, as in the normal, because this is the society we live in, this very, very, very kind of bizarre binary path, don't we? We need to kind of open it up. And we need to be able to, you know, think really, really carefully about how we do it as well. So, you know, often when I write in my emails, I have an access sort of rider, you know, I make light of it because that's of who I am. But often I get emails and they're not approached in the way that I've sort of asked, which is fine. You know, it's me, I have to take the time, but it, you know, it also would be really useful if somebody was to write me an email and it would be exactly in the way that, and when people do, I'm like, thank you so much. You know, this is so helpful and just makes my life a lot easier and quicker, you know, because who doesn't want to be quick as well? So yeah, we've come a long way. I mean, I was a curator in the early 2000s, and, you know, I had the director stand in my office, tell me I was dyslexic, and literally turn on their heels and walk out. I was like, whoa, thanks, that's nice. I'll be leaving this organization then. You know, and I did, you know, I left. I was like, I'm not having that sort of, when my work is about, you know, is socially engaged practice, and it's really about understanding the value of what we do and how that translates to the world, and the approach and the process. So yeah, you know, if I would give any advice, it's to do the learning yourself. You don't have to be paid to do the learning. You can listen to podcasts, you can, you know, walk to work, you can, you know, have a bath, you know, can listen to things. You don't have to do the reading. You can listen to things nowadays, you know. And I think it's a responsibility. It's not just about, it's in your professional development practice within your organization and it's being paid for. It really has to be about who you are in this ecology, in this community, because, you know, the world out there isn't doing that. We have to really think about, you know, our kind of own personal learning and knowledge, which is, you know, which not often happens at all. And I like, be brave, you know, get it wrong. Absolutely, Cheryl, totally get it wrong. Like, it's fine to get it wrong, you know, to say the wrong thing, but to say, oh God, have I said that right? You know, and to open it up, have openness about it, because I think there is this fear. There's a massive fear factor, but we need to be able to kind of not close down the conversation. And I've been in programs where, you know, we run a national program called Fair and Equitable, which is about what I'm talking about. And I've been in situations where the conversation's been closed down, which doesn't help anyone, really doesn't help anyone at all to learn. So we need that supportive environment, and to use that word care in the center of it, in an equality to everyone, because not everyone is going to know. So it's not just a word that you project as, I expect you to care for me. It's actually, I'm caring for you as well. If we're going to get to this non-binary kind of experience that we all want, really, because in some respects, activists can be binary. They can be so focused in their approach, which doesn't help as well. It helps in some situations, but it doesn't help when you're talking about an equality of how to think about other people as well. Because the diversity of experience needs to be absolutely 360. It needs to be entirely 360. It can't be a 180. It has to be, you know, if you've got somebody in the room who is conservative, engage with them. That's what I say. You know, you've got to find a relationship between each other.
And for someone, Paula, who say would love to ask for that formatting of the email, but doesn't have the confidence to ask for what they need, do you have any advice?
Just step out and do it, and then sit with it, and just feel that you're standing on your own feet doing it. And that's you know, it is hard. It took me till I was 45, 46. A long time in my practice, like 26 years, near enough, you know, in this world, to do that, you know. Yeah, have the confidence when you feel it's right. You know, I think it is about trying to be confident in it as well, which isn't easy. It is not easy. But once you do it, I mean, God, the amount of kind of conversations I've had have been remarkable. You know, to the point where one colleague came up to me and she said, my son is dyslexic, and your access, you know, the bottom of your emails really helped me think how to help him. And now he's into this kind of community, and he's got more, you know, support. And I was just like, well, if that's, you know, that's amazing for me. So it's actually, it's the barrier that you kind of, I created a barrier for myself. And that's led by an ego. You know, all of these things are there. They're all kind of implicit in your experience. You know, I didn't want to identify as somebody who has a disability. You know, that sounds awful thing to say, but it's honest. You know, I was, you know, in a world that is, you know, white and clean and very, very straight. You know, the art world, which it professes not to be, but it is. Yeah. So I never felt like I could say that. No, I never felt like I could. Yeah.
Paula, don't you think, as I said before, a lot of these things though are just best practice? Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm really crap because I don't format properly, but if you followed it, it's just a clearer way of communicating, and it would benefit everybody. And I think the other thing, as you said before, that the idea of normal is getting so narrow that everybody is going to end up not being normal. So there's not going to be a choice. I think we have to look at doing these things.
Definitely.
And I think a lot of them also come back to, you know, people having the right terminology or vocabulary to express their needs and ask what other people's needs are. And I think we're sort of starting to come up to time, but I thought one question that would be wonderful to end on is actually asking each of us to define what the term access is or what it means to us, because I think it's a term that is so used at the moment, and sometimes just coming back to asking what access is can be a good starting point for artists or people setting up residencies or really anyone working within the sector. So I wonder if anyone would like to have a go at saying what access is.
I'll go. I think for our artists, access is about feeling safe and comfortable in an environment. So it's not just the physical access. We talk quite a lot about attitudinal access. All three of our studios are in wider studio groups, and one of the reasons that we've chose those three particular studio groups to be part of is because we feel wanted there. We feel happy there. We feel that the other artists around us are happy to have us there. And I think that we often forget about that when we think about having ramps and loops and all sorts of things. What we forget about is that you have to feel comfortable and safe and wanted where you are. So it's everything. Sometimes it's more important to be somewhere that you just feel wanted and appreciated than it is to have a ramp to get there.
Mm. 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 Yeah, the deeper learning, deeper learning, and just taking the time, like tying your shoelaces up every day. That's what equality, diversity, inclusion should be. You know, you tie your shoelaces up to, to join in, to walk with. I think that's what I would say.
That's a beautiful
Not trip over shoelaces as well. It's an analogy, isn't it? Mm.
Yeah,
and
do you know,
oh no, please let go.
do you know Access Intimacy by Mia Mingus? It's like this beautiful text, and I love it. And there's like it's like sometimes intimacy just means holding hands, staring at an inaccessible world. So for me, it's like this also just being there and listening and understanding and as a start.
Mm.
I think they're three beautiful definitions of access. So thank you. Well, thank you so much for making time today. I know you're all really busy, but I think it's been a beautiful conversation, and one I've got a notebook full of notes now, so one that a lot will come out of, and hopefully will spark a lot of work that we can do at Res Artis to build more resources and advice for our members. So thank you all very much.